Persepolis, in the twilight of the Achaemenid Empire. The palace was built to outlive death, but inside its marble halls, the cruelest things never left a mark. They whispered of loyalty, like it was currency, like it could be cashed in. But no one ever asked what happened when a man gave too much. When he bled for the king, knelt before him, offered everything. What the king gave in return was not mercy, it was something far colder. He gave him honor, and then he took his wife. Artaban returned to the capital in silence, dressed in blood-stained armor and glory. He had crushed rebellions in the east, secured new borders for the empire, and left his own son behind on the battlefield, buried beneath enemy arrows. When he arrived at the gates of Persepolis, the people threw petals, the nobles bowed, and in the high courts, the king smiled. He called Artaban, not a man, but a legend. He said loyalty like this had to be rewarded. That night, a great banquet was thrown in the hall of 100 columns. Gold dripped from the ceiling, music spilled like wine, and the air smelled of roasted lamb and incense. But Artaban's eyes searched only for one thing, the figure standing near the back, her head bowed beneath a silk veil. Zareen, his wife, his only softness in a world of war. She had aged in his absence, but not cruelly. Her beauty had turned colder, quieter, like winter sunlight. She did not run to him. She had been taught not to. She lowered her eyes and waited for him to speak first. He did not. He could not. Because just then, the king raised his goblet and said, "A commander like this deserves more than land or gold. He deserves something eternal." And then he looked at Zareen. He did not speak her name. He did not have to. The gaze of a king was law. The right of desire unspoken, unwritten, unstoppable. The music did not stop. The dancers kept twirling. But Artaban's blood turned to iron. He knew the law. If the king looked upon your wife with favor, it was not theft, it was tribute. To protest would be treason. To refuse would be suicide. So he swallowed his name. He bowed his head, and the king called it loyalty. Later that night, Zareen stood in the outer courtyard beneath torchlight, her veil wet with rain. She did not scream. She did not speak. She simply turned toward the palace gates when they summoned her, and disappeared into the chambers of the man her husband had killed for. The most loyal commander in Persia went home alone, with more gold than he could carry, and less of a soul than he could remember. They called it an honor, a reward fit for a woman whose husband had bled for the empire. Zareen was told nothing directly, of course. That was not how it worked. She was summoned to the women's quarters inside the palace and handed a new robe, thinner, redder, woven with gold thread that scratched her skin when she moved. Her name was never spoken aloud. No one dared. They simply said, "The king has looked upon her," and every door opened. The queen mother smiled without warmth. The eunuchs adjusted her veil. The other wives looked away. It was not fear. It was habit, ritual, obedience. The law was never written, only lived. In the empire's early days, the elders had warned that kings who took from their subjects would lose the loyalty of men, so the rule changed: the king could not take, he could only look. And if he looked long enough, and you did not offer what he desired, then it was you who had broken custom, not him. This was called the right of gaze. It was older than justice, stronger than law, and it was now hers to endure. Zareen was escorted into the inner chambers at dusk. The guards did not touch her. They never needed to. She walked with the silence she had been trained for since girlhood, steps that made no sound. Shoulders pulled back but not proud. Eyes lowered but not closed. The hallway stretched endlessly, lit by blue flames and carved stone lions. She had never been in this part of the palace before. Wives did not enter here. Only offerings. She was led into the Garden of Obedience. That was not its real name, but it was what the women called it under their breath. A courtyard enclosed on all sides by high white walls and silk curtains, with a fountain in the center that never stopped flowing. Flowers bloomed in symmetrical rows, not wild, not free, arranged, curated, controlled, like the women who walked between them. They did not speak. Some sat in the shade reading verses. Some stood like statues near the pool, hands folded, eyes blank. Zareen joined them without question, a new flower planted, a new silence added. That night, she was not summoned, she was merely observed, watched through half-closed doors by the king's attendants, measured for posture, evaluated for obedience, tested for elegance. She sat on the marble bench until her legs trembled. She did not blink too often. She did not wipe the sweat from her brow. She left the garden only when she was dismissed, with a bow so low it scraped her knuckles on the floor. In her chambers, she did not sleep. Instead, she folded the red robe into a perfect square and laid it beside her like a warning. The king had looked, and the garden had opened. What came next would not be hers to decide. At dawn, Zareen was handed a silver bowl and a soft bristled brush. She was told to water the garden, not with servants, not with music, but with silence. Every wife in the enclosure was assigned a row. The lilies by the eastern gate belonged to a girl from Bactria. The pomegranates near the center were guarded by an old widow with eyes like glass. Zareen was given the western edge jasmine vines, thin and crawling, stubborn in the wind. She was not allowed to speak to the others, not even to nod. In the garden, speech belonged only to the king, and he was never there. She worked with her sleeves tied back and her hair pinned tight. The red robe scratched against her neck, reminding her that her body was not hers, but her hands still moved freely. She watered slowly, evenly, each root fed with care, all except one. A vine curled at the base of the garden wall, furthest from the path, hidden beneath a stone bench. She passed it each morning and left it untouched. Not out of forgetfulness, out of defiance. A single breath of disobedience. In a world that demanded ritual, no one noticed. Or if they did, they said nothing. Zareen's back remained straight, her eyes lowered, her hands steady. In every visible way, she was perfect. She never lagged behind. She never spilled water. But each day, the vine withered a little more. By the 7th morning, it had lost its leaves. By the 10th, it had turned brittle. Still, no one intervened. At night, Zareen lay awake in a room not hers, with servants who said her name like a curse. They touched her only to dress her. They measured her wrists, her ankles, her silence. Sometimes, she was summoned to sit behind the lattice window of the king's chamber, not to be spoken to, only seen. He never addressed her directly. He played a lyre or listened to verses recited by boys with honeyed voices, as if she were not there. Zareen sat still, her breath shallow, her heart a stone pressed between ribs. In the garden, another wife noticed the dying vine, a girl barely past childhood, her eyes lined with kohl, her lips always trembling. She watched Zareen with quiet terror. One morning, she knelt beside the vine and tried to pour water onto its dry roots. Zareen's hand shot out and stopped her. No words, just a single look. The girl backed away. That night, Zareen dreamed of fire, not a wild blaze, but something controlled flames dancing in rows, neat and ritualistic, like everything else in the palace. In the dream, the king watched without blinking, and beside him, the vine burned without making smoke. When she woke, her pillow was soaked, but not from tears. She did not cry anymore. She had learned how to rot quietly. Artaban no longer wore his armor. The palace had taken it from him, piece by piece, until all that remained was the quiet shape of a man too loyal to grieve. He walked the marble halls like a shadow cast by someone else. Servants bowed. Nobles praised his victories. The king even gifted him a new estate near the northern mountains, where the air was said to be clean enough to erase memory. But Artaban did not go. He stayed, always just beyond the garden walls, never speaking her name, never asking where she slept. He had not seen Zareen since the banquet. That was the rule. Once the king had looked, the husband must forget, must pretend that love had been a duty, and that duty had now been fulfilled. Artaban understood this. He understood everything, the right of gaze, the price of victory, the architecture of obedience. But some nights, his hands still reached across an empty bed, searching for a wrist that was no longer his to hold. The whispers reached him like smoke. That she had not cried. That she walked the garden like she had always belonged there. That the king had not yet summoned her for anything beyond display. He listened without reacting. At least, not where they could see. In private, he sharpened his sword over and over, though no battle had been declared. One evening, as the sun fell behind the stone terraces of Persepolis, Artaban found himself near the garden gate. He did not open it. He only stood there, motionless, listening to the faint trickle of the fountain beyond the wall. He imagined her hands dipped in water, her veil clinging to her neck, her silence pressed into the soil. He imagined her forgetting his voice. A scribe passed by and greeted him with reverence. "You are fortunate," he said, unaware of his own cruelty. "No greater honor than to be trusted with the king's desire." Artaban nodded once, then turned away. His fingernails had dug half-moons into his palm. That night, he sat at the edge of the palace training yard, watching the young recruits clash wooden swords under torchlight. One of them stumbled and looked up, frightened, waiting for correction, but Artaban said nothing. In the dark of his chamber, he removed the signet ring that bore his family crest and placed it into a small iron box. He locked it, then sealed the key behind a brick in the wall. Zareen was gone. Not dead, not taken, just reassigned. The court would call it elevation, the king would call it devotion, but Artaban knew what it truly was, a test, and the only way to pass was to disappear without noise. So he swallowed his name, he extinguished his memory, and he walked into the morning like nothing had ever been his. The sun rose blood orange over Persepolis on the morning of the ritual. The priests called it a blessing, the court called it a rite, the people called it nothing, because no one dared name what it truly was. Zareen was awakened before dawn. Her silk robe had been replaced with a heavier one, crimson and gold, embroidered with peacocks and knives. Her hair, once bound in the modest knot of a wife, was let down and brushed with oils, not gently, not cruelly, just indifferently. She was not told where she was going. She was simply led barefoot through the palace halls, past rooms she had never seen, doors that only opened for offerings. The guards did not speak, their eyes did not move, everything was arranged with ceremonial silence, but Zareen could feel the watching, the invisible weight of every gaze. Each step on the cold stone floor sent shivers up her legs. Still, she did not stumble. The hall of sacred possession was lined with tall braziers, each flame burning blue, as if fed by something unnatural. In the center stood the king, robed in white. Behind him, his most trusted advisors, among them Artaban. He did not meet her eyes. He looked straight ahead, as if she were not his wife, but a shadow passing through protocol. She felt nothing toward him, not anger, not sorrow, only distance, as if he had already died in some quiet way. She was instructed to kneel. The floor was covered in powdered ash and rose petals. She obeyed. A priest began to chant the lineage of the king, reciting generations of conquest, each name striking like a drumbeat. Then came her name, only once, only softly, followed by a pause, a silence that lasted long enough to kill something inside her. The king stepped forward. He did not touch her. That was not part of the ritual. Touch came later. This was the declaration. His hand hovered above her head, and the high priest announced her elevation from wife to vessel, from private woman to public treasure. The crowd bowed. Artaban remained still. Zareen did not bow her head. She did not cry. But her breath caught for a single moment, a fracture in her mask. No one noticed, or pretended not to. The ceremony continued. She was handed a small silver ring bearing the king's seal, and told to wear it at all times. Her wedding ring had already been removed. When it ended, she was taken back to the garden. Nothing had changed, except everything. She walked past the other women, now a rank above them. She did not feel higher. She felt hollow. That night, as she watered the rose, she passed the withered vine and paused. Still dead, still unwatered, she touched its dry stem, and for the first time, she smiled. It had died on her terms. Years passed, quietly, without shape, without name. Zareen remained in the garden, her hair now streaked with silver, her posture still perfect. New wives arrived, trembling, still smelling of homes they'd barely left. Some were sent by governors, others were taken after rebellions. They came with questions in their eyes. Zareen never answered. She taught them only by stillness, when to bow, when to disappear, when to rot. The king grew older, slower, his eyes dulled, but his power never did. No one dared speak of his fading strength, not even when he stopped walking the garden paths, not even when he forgot the names of the women he once praised. Zareen was no longer summoned, not even for display. She was a monument now, a symbol of loyalty, a relic that proved the system still worked. One winter, word spread that Artaban had died. No ceremony, no mourning, just a brief note carved into the stone wall of a temple far north. He had lived alone. His second wife left him. No children survived. He was remembered for his victories, not his silence. Zareen felt nothing, not grief, not relief, only confirmation that loyalty had taken everything and left nothing behind. The garden was colder now, the fountains slower. One morning, a younger woman knelt beside the dead vine that still clung to the wall. It had never been removed. No one touched it. Zareen watched her place a single seed near its roots. Quietly, without speaking, without being told. Something stirred in her chest, not hope, but memory. When the king died, the palace did not erupt. It simply inhaled. The air turned brittle, the rituals began, statues were covered, walls repainted, names re-etched. The wives were scattered, some sent home, some absorbed by new courts, some vanished. Zareen was given no orders, no summons, no destination. She walked through the garden one last time. Her steps were slower now, her robe heavier. She passed the place where the vine had died and found something small pushing through the soil. Not a flower, just a leaf, but alive. She left through the southern gate, unescorted. No one stopped her, no one bowed. She did not return to her old home. There was nothing left. She walked into the dust beyond Persepolis and vanished, like so many before her. Her name never made it into the scrolls. Her face was never carved into stone. But years later, when the palace lay in ruins and vines swallowed its bones, travelers whispered of the woman who had taught others how to suffer in silence and how to survive it. She was never meant to be remembered, but you remember her now. If you believe stories like Zareen's still matter, subscribe, and tell me in the comments which state you're watching from. I read them all.